My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we are looking at the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15. I have spent 7 lessons so far setting before you one of the most critical, one of the most foundational tenets and facts for the proper interpretation of 1 Corinthians 15. And that is that no matter what else we might think about it, if we do not bring our understanding of 1 Corinthians 15 into line, into harmony with the fact that the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 was Paul's iteration, Paul's teaching about the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Now, I've shared with you that Israel's hope was the one eschatological hope. It summed up, it assimilated, it conflated, it subsumed. Whatever word you wish to use, the hope of Adam, which was brought forward and incorporated into and was in fact the hope of Abraham, which was carried forward, subsumed, conflated with, and became the hope of Israel. There is no dichotomy. And this is absolutely critical. I've shared with you how in numerous formal debates, my amillennial and my postmillennial opponents have said openly in written form, their eschatological hope is not based upon, not taken from, God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. They have said it's Adamic or it is Abrahamic. False. Folks, that is an absolutely false doctrine. It is a false dichotomy. Abraham did not have a hope, an eschatological hope, different from Israel. Adam did not have an eschatological resurrection hope different from 1 Corinthians 15 or the hope of Israel. Now, with all of that said, all right, and I realize that's repetitious, but the best way that we learn is repetition, repetition, repetition. But the question is raised, okay, if 1 Corinthians 15 is about the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel, and if that means it is about the fulfillment of Adamic eschatological hope, it is about the fulfillment of the Abrahamic eschatological hope, if that's true, and it obviously is, what can we learn for that in regard to the timing of fulfillment? Well, point number one, if Adam's hope had become Israel's hope, if Abraham's hope had become the hope of Israel, that suggests to us one of two things. Number one, the fulfillment of the Adamic, Abrahamic, we'll even say Jobian, eschatological hope would be fulfilled when Israel had fulfilled her purposes in God's scheme of redemption. In other words, that one hope is carried forward, and posited in and under Israel. Well, you see, we've got a problem here. We're told emphatically, explicitly and repeatedly, that the eschatological hope could not be fulfilled through Torah. Torah was weak through the flesh. Romans 8, 1-3. Torah, although it was good and spiritual, came to be death for Paul, for Israel. In other words, it compounded the problem of death. It did not solve it. So that means that the solution to death, the Adamic death, Abrahamic promise, would therefore have to come at the end of Torah, but certainly not by means of Torah. Or the second possibility that some might suggest is to say, well, look, the Adamic hope was brought forward, assimilated into the hope of Abraham, passed on. Abraham's hope was passed on, and it became the Davidic hope, passed on. Therefore, what that would suggest, we are told, the Adamic hope was passed on to Abraham. The Abrahamic hope was passed on to Moses and Israel. But since it hasn't happened, that means that it has now been passed on to the church. So we have just a continuous line of unfulfilled hope. We have a continuous line of the singular one hope being assimilated into, subsumed under one system after another without fulfillment. And so we are told, we are now waiting for the end of the Christian age and the end of time for the fulfillment of that one singular Adamic, Abrahamic, Davidic, Jobian, and Mosaic one hope that will be fulfilled at the end of time. Unfortunately for the futurist, there is not one syllable of Scripture to support that doctrine. Number one, the Bible never talks about the end of time. That is a theological invention that completely ignores the nature of Hebraic apocalyptic language that the New Testament and the Old Testament writers clearly used. Secondly, it overlooks the fact that the biblical writers tell us this about Adam and Abraham and David and their eschatological hope. Here's what I mean. Abraham saw his hope of the resurrection, the new heaven, and the new earth. What was he told about it? What did he know about it? Well, look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13 and following. These, that's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., these all died in faith, not having received the promises. Now watch this. You got to catch the power of this. But having seen them far off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Okay? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were told that the fulfillment of their resurrection hope, which was the Adamic resurrection hope, was not for their day, it was far off. Oh, but wait. Jesus said of Abraham and of Abraham's hope, Abraham longed to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Not near in Abraham's day, near in Peter's day. By the way, what did Balaam say? Numbers 24, 17 and 19. Speaking of the coming of Messiah, I see him, but he's not near. I see him, but he's not nigh. The eschatological hope of Israel in Balaam's day, the eschatological hope, therefore, of Abraham in Balaam's day was far off. Now then, watch this. In 1 Peter chapter 1, the writer speaks of the coming eternal inheritance, incorruptible, undefiled, that fades not away, the salvation of the soul, which they were at that time receiving. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 9, present active indicative. And he says, concerning this salvation, the prophets have inquired and searched diligently concerning the time and the manner of the things which they did testify, when they spoke concerning the sufferings of Christ and the glory that should follow, to whom it was revealed that not to themselves they did minister those things. Did you catch that? The Old Testament prophets who spoke of the salvation of the soul, salvation to be brought through the work of Christ, were told it was not for their day. It was far off. Oh, but wait. That same writer said in Acts chapter 3 that all of the prophets from Moses, Samuel, yea, whoever wrote, when they spoke of the restoration of all things, which would arrive at the second coming of Christ, Peter said they spoke of, quote, these days, unquote. Those were Peter's days. Peter's days. Do you see that, folks? So here's what this means. In 1 Corinthians 15, we have the doctrine of the resurrection, which was Abraham's hope, which he saw far off. It was Job's hope, which he saw far off. It was David's hope, and David, even though he had a Sabbath rest, spoke of another day. Hebrews chapter 4, citing Psalms. Over and over and over, the New Testament writers tell us that what the Old Testament writers spoke of, the hope of Adam, the hope of Abraham, the hope of David, was far off in those days, but in the first century it had drawn near. And thus, the time for fulfillment had arrived. That's why Peter could say, the end goal of all things has drawn near. It is why Jesus said, the time is fulfilled. The kingdom of heaven has drawn near. Matthew 4:17. So, when we come to 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and realize it was the hope of Adam, of Abraham, of David, and then when we realize that they all saw their hope not near, but far off, but they saw Jesus' day and they were glad, and we realize that the New Testament writer said fulfillment was near 2,000 years ago, folks, that means we have to bring our eschatology into conformity with the reality that the fulfillment of 1 Corinthians 15, no matter what our concept of the resurrection, that resurrection was to be fulfilled in the first century. This is critical. So, we will continue our study of this great chapter, 1 Corinthians 15 and the resurrection. God bless.